Can't condone what's happening in the public gallery. I seen it when you walked in, people turn their back on you personally. It's not a personal issue. This is a democratic committee that makes decisions, and I would please ask you to refrain from that sort of behaviour.
Thank you, Councillor Fowkes. As I said, this meeting will be webcast and a record retained on the Council website for up to 2 years. For those at home viewing the webcast, I would like to inform you that if you look above the video, you will see a Resources tab. Select this and a link to the agenda will appear in the right-hand side. This will allow you to open the agenda in PDF form and follow the discussion and debate. Do we have any apologies for absence? No? Everybody present? Thank you. At this point, could any members present declare any interest that they might have in any items on the agenda tonight?
Chair, I will just mention that I was a member of the Planning Committee on the seawall, but I am more than capable of making decisions in different committees with an open mind. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Councillor Fowkes. No other declarations of interest on any items tonight, so that takes us to the minutes, which can be found on page 1 to 10. Does anyone have any comments on the minutes from our last meeting?
Chair, I've got a couple of questions about that. Do you want me to ask them now or later?
Are they comments on the minutes?
Not comments about the minutes, but there is a question about your answers.
If you have a problem with the minutes, then I'd like you to clarify what the problem is with the minutes. Okay, thank you. I just need to, there are a few typing errors in the resolution to the Love Wirral strategy, but I think it's perfectly clear what is meant in that resolution, so there are no major issues as far as I'm concerned. If these typing errors are corrected, can I propose that we approve the accuracy of the minutes of the meeting that was held on Wednesday, the 20th of October 2021? Can we agree that by assent? Thank you. This brings us to public and member questions. And we have received one new question. And in the absence of the questioner, I will paraphrase and ensure that a written response is supplied. The resident, Mr Smith, asks that, as the chair of the meeting has declared a climate emergency, why is Wirral Council still driving quad bikes and spraying pavements and streets outside schools and people's houses with glyphosate? He also asks, sponsoring community fireworks displays for certain areas on the Wirral, and believes that this does go against our climate emergency declaration. A full response will be provided in writing, but I would just like to say that I would first of all like to thank Mr Smith for his question, and I would like to assure him that we are actively engaged in phasing out glyphosate, as promised, and we are pursuing alternatives for weed control. And this committee recently approved a short-term contract on the understanding that officers step up the pursuit of glyphosate alternatives and reducing usage further, and to make the case for future in-house provision for weed control. As for fireworks, I agree with you that we do need to consider the environmental impacts of these, and again we have been working more closely with environmental agencies such as Natural England to ensure best practice here. So thank you again for your question. This brings us to 5.2, which is statements and petitions, and I would like to invite Anthony Clark to present his petition, West Kirby Sea Defence Wall. I'd like to remind Mr Clark and everyone else that he has up to 1 minute to outline the aims of the petition. Thank you.
Chair, sorry, can I ask a question about questions? You skipped on. I just got a question about questions. I wonder if our legal help here could... I'm aware that a number of questions were submitted and were submitted before the date that they were supposed to be submitted, and yet they've been ruled out. Now, I think we understand that there is a no similar question in 6 months, but I'd just like some guidance on when petitioners or question askers should submit their questions, and if they can receive some guidance on why it's been ruled out, and therefore they could change their questions prior to committee.
First. Each of the questioners has received a full answer on that, outlining exactly why their question was rejected.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, members, under the Constitution, it says that if the monitoring officer considers a question is substantially the same as a question which has been put at a meeting of the Council in the past 6 months, then the monitoring officer should inform the chair, who can decide whether or not to reject the question. We have over the last 6 months received quite a large number of questions in relation to Hoylake Beach. I have considered the questions that were submitted in relation to this meeting. Whilst they were submitted in time, some of them were submitted only shortly before the deadline. Obviously, if they had been submitted a little earlier, we could have considered them sooner and perhaps gone back to people and given some advice. But in my view, it was the case that all of the questions that were submitted were substantially the same as questions that have been previously answered over the past 6 months. And so that was my advice to the Chair, who has decided on this occasion not to allow those questions. It is correct that we have people have sent in individual emails, and we have responded explaining that and suggesting that maybe in future, if they submitted their questions in a different format or at an earlier time, we could work with them regarding that.
Chair, thank you.
Thanks, Vicky. So yes, Mr. Clark, and the petition, please.
Okay, shall I start? Yeah. Okay. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to present this petition tonight that asks councillors and this committee to save West Kirby Promenade and pursue other flood alleviation options. The full petition can be read at www.change.org/save West Kirby Promenade. West Kirby Promenade is an iconic location and one of the jewels in the crown of the Wirral, enjoyed by thousands of people every year. Many local residents believe that proposals to create a 1.2 metre high concrete wall along the promenade will be hugely detrimental. The 1.2 metre footway to the rear of the promenade, this is 1.2 metres, to the rear of the promenade is well below national standards and should be reconsidered against the Equalities Act. Users cannot pass and will be forced into the road, causing a very significant safety issue, perhaps that greater than the flood risk itself. Item 7 on tonight's agenda, you're asked to agree and delegate the decision to an officer to appoint a contractor to undertake £6 million worth of work to deliver this scheme, starting as early as February next year. You're asked not to agree this. Due to the high level of concerns locally and the sensitivities of this proposal, the final decision should be taken democratically and not delegated. The petition asks for the Council to pause and allow a much wider democratic debate. Do not be rushed by a buy it now or lose it threat of funding from the Environment Agency. This is not the way to make decisions. There is a very real risk that costs will escalate, and is the £2.4 million of Wirral Borough Council funding allocation best spent on this right now? Does the investment of £2.4 million warrant the need and risks today?
Mr. Clark, you've had your minute. Can you wrap it up, please?
Okay.
Your assistant took more than 2 minutes to explain a question about a question to this gentleman over here. And this is a democratic breach with this gentleman.
Sorry, can I remind the members of the public that this is a meeting in public and not a public meeting. It's just, this is a meeting in public. You're here to observe. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I will wrap it up, yes. Okay, so as committee members, are you assured that this is the best option? Are you satisfied that you have seen other options to tackle flood alleviation along West Kirby Promenade and that they have been exhausted? Are you assured that over 5,000 tonnes of concrete is the best option for West Kirby Promenade? Is £6 million best value? And is this design solution really worth the sacrifice right now? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Clark. This brings us on to 5.3, which is members' questions, and none have been received, which would then take us on to agenda item number 6, which is the acceptance of tenders and award of contracts for highway services. And this can be found on pages 9 to 24 of the agenda pack. And I would like to invite Simon Fox to present this report. Thank you very much, Simon.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, Chair, I'm pleased to introduce this report. In March 21, your committee resolved to approve a recommended highway service for Wirral based upon an in-house plus top-up delivery model. That resolution included a decision to approve a procurement strategy based around tendering new longer-term A contracts, those contracts through which the Council delivers its planned highway structural maintenance activities, and for authorisation of the Director of Neighbourhoods to amend the number and scope of those contracts to ensure effective service provision. Tonight's report sets out that process. The report recommends accepting tenders and awarding 7 separate contracts and is based on rigorous evaluation and analysis of the tenders submitted by senior council officers, including those from legal, procurement and finance professions. All of the suppliers have pledged to work with the Council towards achieving its net zero carbon goals by the recycling of materials, by reducing laying temperatures, innovative new products and a reduction in quantities of raw materials used, especially fossil fuels. Some of the other benefits that will be delivered throughout the life of these contracts include over £5 million equivalent social value into the Wirral economy by the employment of local people during the life of the contracts, along with other social value offers, including apprenticeships, sponsoring and mentoring young people through further education, the rehabilitation of offenders and the use of local suppliers. These benefits will be monitored throughout the life of the contracts, and KPIs will be reported to this committee as part of the quarterly neighbourhoods performance reports. There are service delivery risks if these contracts are not awarded, and the necessary service support in place by December this year. The statutory standstill period under UK procurement sector regulations has now expired without any challenges being received, and so as a result, this committee is recommended to accept the tenders for the Wirral Highway A1, A1.2, A1.3, 1.4, 1.5 and A2 term contracts for December 21 to November 25, to accept the tender for the Wirral Highway A3 contract for December 21 to March 26, and to approve the award of those contracts subject to contract with the suppliers named in the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks for that report. Does anybody have any questions for Simon about those reports? Mike.
Thanks, Chair. I'm just a bit concerned that a number of these contracts have either got 1 or 2 bidders, and I wouldn't consider that is going to be the best way of going about getting best value. One of the first ones is there's only 1 bidder at all. That's the service dressing processes. So you've only had 1 bid for that. Surely there must be other people that we can actually ask for bids and quotes, because I can't see us getting best value if we've only just got one company bidding for it.
Through you, Chair. There's been more than 1 bidder for each contract. If you look at the appendix, there's 2. In some cases, 3, 4, or 5, I think. Certainly 2 in every case. And this was open tender, so it was available to a number of bidders, and there was a selection questionnaire process that they had to meet before they went into the instructions for tendering and the full tender process. But there's been 2 bidders for everyone.
Yeah, I noticed on the first one it actually says the tender total price is 0, so that's why I assume there hadn't been a second bidder for that. So there's not even a price for it.
So in some cases, the bidders, unfortunately, the bids weren't compliant because they failed to submit the correct pricing schedule, but they still bid for the contract and submitted a quality and social value offer as well.
Yep, thanks for that, Chair.
Thanks, Simon. Any other questions about the reports? Simon.
Simon, moving forward, I don't know if you were in the meeting next door just prior to this one, and your split currently is the quality cost social split. Do you see any need to change that split going forwards?
So we've used various ratios of price, quality and social value, and we take advice from procurement colleagues on what is applicable to which type of contract. And the particular ratios that we've used there, I think it's 50, 40, 10, is one that we were advised to use in this case for this particular type of contract. We have used slightly different ones for others.
Okay, now, we have no money. If someone said to you, I want you to use the cheapest bid at all cost, what argument would you use against that process? To the local economy because of the delivery of these contracts. Many of them are either local suppliers themselves or using local suppliers in their supply chain or local labour. So that's one aspect. In fact, the price in, I think, all cases is good value for money in our opinion, based on benchmarking against the previous contracts that we had in place and other similar contracts that other authorities are applying. So we believe we've got good value for money and good quality and social value offers here with these contracts. Thank you, Chair. And finally, and how do we monitor that social value? How do we measure that at the end of the contract period?
So social value is measured on themes, outcomes and measures. So they offer, if it's local labour, it will be a number of people over a set time, and there's an indicative nominal amount attached to that, which is set by Treasury, so it's a government figure, we don't influence it, and we can then check whether that's, through the contract management processes, whether that's been delivered, and multiply the actual delivery by the notional value and quantify whether or not they're meeting their targets. And that will be done through contract management, through governance.
Chair, thank you.
Thank you. Steve?
Yeah, I think it's important to say, and to correct Simon's comment that we haven't got any money. Well, we have got money, despite what the press is saying. We have certain challenges within the budget, but I would suggest that skimping or not maintaining one of our biggest assets, which is our road network, would be the wrong direction to take. We have got on top of the issues on the roads. There's still work to be done, but certainly as an asset, it's improved greatly, and we have moved up in the national gradings in terms of road quality when measured externally. And I think if we have put this amount of money in to looking after that asset, then it's right, it should be scrutinised and challenged. But certainly, my view is that maintaining our road services and all the other things that go with that is certainly a key function of the council, and I would not like to return to the old days of what was known as compulsory competitive tendering, where the cheapest always won, and as we all know in life, cheapest isn't always the best when you're spending public money. So we're being asked to deal with professionals within our department who've done a judgment on the tenders, and my view is that we should accept the tender process as presented to committee.
Thanks, Steve. Alan, did you have a question?
I did, Chair, but it was actually the same as Simon's last one, so I won't repeat it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to, I looked through this very carefully, and I was very impressed by the social value, and I'm proud that we have that as part of our process. I was also really pleased to see the environmental work the references to recycling, and I'm aware that road surfacing in particular has got a very heavy carbon footprint, and it's very gratifying to see that this might be moving in the right direction. So I think there's a lot to be pleased with here, and I know that we've got some of the best quality roads in the region, and that's really important if we're trying to get people to get out of their cars and to cycle, walk more. It's important that the road surfaces are as good quality as possible. What might be an inconvenience for many drivers can be lethal for cyclists, so this is a really important feature in our modal shift. So I would personally be very happy to accept the recommendations in this report. So I propose that we accept, if there's no further comments or questions. Simon?
You do mention in the report, I think the phrase is our ageing road network. Is there a problem down the line for us with our ageing road network, or are we on top of that problem?
So with the right level of investment, and of course this isn't necessarily council revenue that we spend in here, this is capital that comes through the city region devolved formula. With that right level of investment and smart management really, then there won't be a problem. So I'm confident with these contracts that we've got in place and the professional staff that we have in place that we can manage the network to the best of our ability to make sure there is no problem down the line.
Thanks, Simon. So, as I was saying, I propose that we accept the recommendations. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you. Thanks, Steve. Can we agree that by assent? Great. Thank you very much. We got that. Thank you. So this brings us to agenda item 7, which is the West Kirby flood alleviation wall, the award of contract for construction phase. And this can be found on pages 25 to 30 in the agenda pack. And I'd like to ask Simon again to present this report. Thanks, Simon.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, Chair, I'm pleased to introduce this report. I've also got my colleague Neil Thomas, who's here to answer any technical questions that may arise as well. So the West Kirby Flood Alleviation Scheme received planning approval at Strategic Planning Subcommittee on the 2nd of November. The benefits and appropriateness of the scheme to West Kirby have already been tested and demonstrated through the various grant funding business cases and planning processes. Planning conditions require that the main construction activities be undertaken between April and September to minimise disruption to the natural environment of the Dee estuary, with some activities outside this period but within March to October working programme. Environment Agency grant funding conditions require the construction phase spending commencing in March 2022. The current scheme delivery programme requires the successful contractor to mobilise in February 2022 and to have pre-ordered certain items in December 2021. So these dates can be met and target costs within the available budgets must be agreed with the contractor in advance. And officers are currently preparing tender documentation with the assistance of the Environment Agency as the key funder. Unfortunately, timescales will not allow officers to report back to your committee with contract award recommendations and still meet the planning conditions that have been set. So, as a result, the committee is recommended to approve the proposed procurement process and strategy for the construction of the West Kirby Flood Alleviation Scheme set out in paragraph 3.7 of the report, and to delegate authority to the Director of Neighbourhood Services to award the Advanced Engineering Construction Contract and the Main Construction Phase Engineering and Construction Contract. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Simon. Before inviting questions or comments on this matter, I just feel like I do have to remind everybody that this scheme has already got planning permission, and we're not here to debate whether or not West Kirby needs a flood wall. Planning permission has already been granted. We're asked to approve the procurement process and strategy for its construction, and asked that, given the time constraints, we delegate award of contracts to the Director of Neighbourhoods. That's what we're here to discuss. Okay. Any comments or questions about that?
Simon, thanks for the report. We've seen the costs, but does that include any increase in the costs? Because we know construction costs are going up due to a number of factors. Have we got that built in? And what's going to happen if the costs do go through the roof with our budget?
So part of this process is that officers will work with the Environment Agency. They've got a team that works on costings and advises people who they're providing funding to on this, and we'll work with the contractor to work up what's called the target cost. So that will be based upon rates that they've already pre-tendered through the Environment Agency framework, so they're market-tested rates, and the cost of raw materials will be within the cost of the prices that we agree. Will be fixed at that point in time, but if there's any changes, then we'll be working to a set budget by that point. The Environment Agency have also given some indications that should the need arise, and it is cost increase directly linked to supply chain increases, then they might be able to secure additional funding as well, so there wouldn't be any risk to council coffers.
Just a further question. I noticed you talking about the Environment Agency money. I'm also concerned about the risk to our input, our money that we're putting in. That it just concerns me putting quite a bit of money in, and if the costs are going to go up from our point of view, have we got those provisions, and are we able to really keep an eye on those costs, because we haven't got the spare capacity to cover any additional costs really.
So, as I say, when the target costs are agreed, we will obviously ensure that the budget has provision for contingency within it, so that the target cost of the contract payments aren't, maxing out the budget. We've got sufficient contingency within there for risk, so there'll be a risk allowance within the budget to allow for any changes.
What's the actual percentage of the contingency, please?
So I'm not aware we've got a fixed contingency figure. We will just ensure that there's a sufficient risk allowance within the overall budget. Right.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. The risk figure is somewhere between 10% and 30% on the budget that we have available. Thank you.
Thank you. That were really useful answers there. Do we have any other questions or comments?
I think it's obviously capital is a realm of the budget that is often more easier to deal with than revenue. So I would say that you can often reprofile capital programmes if costs rise, but there is a contingency, as we've heard, within the budget. And you look at, it is highlighted in one of the risk analysis, which we may have been reminded about before in the other room. It's in the risk analysis. There's also in the risk analysis, what if we don't do this programme? And it is a proper decision to be made here tonight to award the contract. And that is quite succinct, really, because we have been able to draw down more than 2/3 of the cost from the Environment Agency and other agencies involved. And it was quite clear, it's made quite clear to us that they have exhausted all the alternatives for the risk that's been predicted given climate change rises and this events forecasting, which is a science I don't understand, but I believe the experts when they tell me that it's a significant risk to life and property in that area. And this is the alternative that has been found to be most effective in been involved or not consulted enough, and you can see there's been quite a lengthy public consultation to the point of where the wall is being positioned, and the design of the wall. It has to be that height, and actually it's quite useful to see the model. There will still be plenty of views across the bay and across the D estuaries of Wales and so on. My view is that that's quite a useful implement that's come to committee tonight. And I think, frankly, I think people are looking who I've talked to think we may be little bit not on the game to actually not consider protecting against flooding. And you can go back in history to major events in Wirral and Towyn, and the local authority there were criticised, and up and down the country people have been criticised. So if we don't take the action now. The other thing the petitioner mentioned about the delegated authority, I think we heard next door that once we make a political decision and we want to do the work, we should get on and do it. And that's what the delegation is about. I've heard on a couple of occasions now our officers and the expertise of the Environment Agency, and those experts have come together with this solution, and we will try to deliver. I think, and on a personal note, I don't find the visuals of it unattractive. I know there's going to be massive public realm works going in as part of this budget, and the promenade does look a bit tired from my own personal point of view. I'm not embarrassed by the imagery we see every night on Channel 4 with the big roboty thing going down with the seawall. Doesn't look unattractive to me. In fact, I'm quite proud when I see that image projected at Wirral. I think it will become part of the street furniture with people sitting and promenading and doing all the things associated with West Kirby. And I've heard nothing factual to tell me that this is any risk to the future economy and the prosperity of West Kirby. I would argue the better, more, because there will be a curiosity period once it's constructed. And I'm also aware, for environmental reasons, the work has to be carried out in a, perhaps the officers can confirm that, in a period of time that doesn't affect the local ecology, wading birds and nesting birds, etc. So my view is that this is the business end of the job. It's been through planning, as you rightly say, Chair. The business end of the job is let's get on with it. Let's get it, make the best job of it. Let's improve the public realm and award the contract and delegate the authority to the experts to crack on.
Thanks, Steve. I wholeheartedly agree with what you're saying. Does anybody else have any comments? Alan?
Thank you, Chair. I agree very much with what Steve has just said. Our petitioner this evening obviously was voicing concern about this project, and anything of this nature is inevitably going to divide opinion to some extent. One of the criticisms made was that we were rushing into a decision. Well, I was first elected to this council in 2018, and one of the first meetings I attended, Neil was talking to us about the West Kirby sea defences, and it turned out that had already been in progress for 3 years by that stage. So I think, in all fairness, this is not an issue that Wirral has rushed into. There have been consultations, and the design has been modified and improved following those consultations. So I think it does show that the council listens to people. It's not going to please everybody. Inevitably, a decision like this isn't going to. But I think one feature of it that I think hasn't been mentioned particularly appeals to me, the fact we're going to get a dedicated, segregated cycle route along the Prom, which I think is excellent. The more sinuous design of the barrier is going to be more appealing. There'll be seating. I think it is something, as Steve said, that people will grow to appreciate. And apart from anything else, of course, it is an essential thing that we actually make our seaside fronts safe, as safe as we can against the rising tides and brought by global warming. So I'm very happy to support this, and I think in view of the time constraints, it's absolutely right that we do delegate the decision to our very capable officers.
Thanks, Alan. I agree with that as well. I think it will actually be a tourist attraction. It will be part of the visitor economy. Thank you. Chris?
Yes, I've just got a comment to make about this, really. In the report itself, page 26, paragraph 3.1, the last line, it talks about the South Parade Promenade in West Kirby, which will be given a high standard of protection to local residential and commercial properties. So the emphasis in the report here is on properties, protecting residence properties and businesses, effectively. And now, obviously, it's more than that, because Councillor Fawkes and Braham have both pointed out the other aspects of it, you know, protecting the coastline, protecting it for visitors and so on, and people using the transport networks. So it's more than just the properties. However, I'm just wondering, you know, going forward into a new era where everybody's scratching around for finances here, there and everywhere, it's great that we've got a large proportion of this money from government. The council isn't having to foot the whole bill. But is there any protocol at all whereby you could actually invite people who directly benefit from this, homeowners, businesses, to make a contribution, albeit on a voluntary basis? It's purely, you know, a question to open up perhaps a new idea in how we might finance things. I think the council can accept donations, can't it? I've heard this.
Thank you, Chair, through you. The whole way that grant funding is now arranged is through what's called a partnership funding approach. And in principle, that means that the beneficiary should in some way contribute, or the beneficiary of a scheme is entitled to contribute if they wish. So in this case, the council's contribution is the partnership funding element of the grant funding, and that allows us to bring in the rest of the grant funding. If we didn't make that contribution, or if other beneficiaries hadn't made a contribution, then the grant funding wouldn't be available.
Thanks for answering that.
Thanks, Neil. Simon?
Chair, thank you. Consultation is a two-way process. And yes, it may have been going on since Alan was a lad, but as I say, it's a two-way process. There were a number of people here this evening that quite clearly, during that consultation process, either haven't been listened to or haven't had the feedback that should have been offered to them, because they're under the impression that this is the only scheme that's ever been considered. And a straight wall during consultation was made into a wavy wall, and that's the best they've got. Now, if we're going to get better as a council going forward, and understanding that money might be tighter, and we have to get buy-in from the public for all these things that we're going to have to do, our consultation process must improve, because we're not listening, or we're not feeding back, or both.
Sorry, Councillor Martin, I do agree with Alan on this one. I became a councillor at the same time, and of all the things that we've done as a council, this has probably been something that we consulted on more than most things, and we certainly did adapt in response to the feedback. So I don't recognise what you're saying at all, and I do recognise what Alan Braham said, which is that we have consulted, we've listened to residents, and this has been adapted in the light of feedback. I don't really know that we could have done much more, to be honest, rather than knock on every single door and ask people to tell us personally what they think about it. There was a great deal of consultation on this, and a great deal of time and effort has gone into that.
Chair, I'll say again, and you have your opinion and I'll have mine, and I'm representing the people that sat there 10 minutes ago, and they're telling me we don't feel we've been listened to. Now, you can have
we're
your
not
opinion.
Here to debate the. I just want to say we're not here to debate whether or not there's a flood wall. We are here to ask about the delegated authority. And to be honest, if people don't get what they want, that's not the same thing as not being listened. Sorry, I'm still speaking.
You interrupted me, Chair.
I'm still speaking.
You interrupted me.
That was because you were talking. You were debating whether or not we have a flood wall, which is not under debate. The point is that repeatedly, some people around this table don't seem to understand the difference between some residents not getting what they want in a debate or losing an argument and not being heard. They were heard, but that debate was lost. The debate about whether or not we should have a flood wall was won by the people who want to protect lives, property and businesses in West Kirby. That debate has finished now, and that debate is over. We're now debating whether or not to delegate authority to the Director of Neighbourhoods for the finer details of the contract. Does anybody else have any comments about the delegated authority matter?
Continue.
If it's about the delegated authority, if it's about the pros and cons of a flood defence wall, no.
I find this quite astonishing, but I will try and continue. We've heard from the officers about the contribution from the Environment Agency, and I'm pretty sure that that's to do with the building of the seawall, and there are associated costs with improvement of the public realm. And at Planning Committee, we did discuss, and I put forward in my case, that the people of West Kirby, they want a flood defence, they accept it, they understand it. What they also need, as part of the consultation process, is the improvement to the public realm. And I'm concerned with the state of our public finances, that we will end up with the seawall, but no improvement to the public realm. And therefore, I'd like some reassurance that that might happen. And the petitioner asked a couple of specific questions. Now, I know that they should have been answered at Planning Committee. I was at Planning Committee. They weren't answered. You can look back at the recording. Those specific questions were not answered. If you're telling me that the seawall falls within all the regulations that it needs to fall in, I will accept your answer. But the petitioner was not given those answers and reassurances at Planning Committee. Thank you.
Thanks, Simon. Before I ask Neil to respond to that, I watched every minute of that Planning Committee meeting, and I would say that every question that was asked was answered in full, and Neil gave fantastic responses that were very reassuring for the majority of people present. I don't know if Neil wants to add anything else to that, or Simon.
Just very briefly, Chair. I think going back to the principle, which is that it seems to be that the residents want some sort of flood defence, and there seems to me three choices. It's either an offshore flood defence, a property level flood defence, or a wall of some type. And clearly this was debated at Planning Committee, and there is a reason why we can't do an offshore flood defence, and there is a reason why we can't do property level flood defences, so it has to be a wall. And the type of wall and the design of that wall was consulted on very heavily. And yes, there will be significant public realm improvements as part of this project. So I think we are satisfied that it complies with our standards and planning consents for highway structure and public realm on the highway as well. Thank you, Chair. Thanks,
Simon. And if we have any questions about whether or not we're happy to delegate authority to the Director of Neighbourhoods, and if not, then can we move to agree the recommendations, please? I propose that we agree the recommendations. Do I have a seconder?
Seconder.
Okay. Thank you. Do we agree by assent, or are we going to go to a vote? We agree by assent. That's great. Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks, Simon. Thanks, Neil. So this brings us to agenda item 8, which is the Public Health Annual Report 2020-2021, and that can be found on pages 31 to 128. It's a very, very important report, and I'd like to invite Julie Webster to present the report. Thanks, Julie.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for allowing me to attend the meeting this evening to present the 2020-21 Public Health Annual Report. This report is an independent annual report from myself and is a statutory requirement. This report describes the enduring health inequalities that we have in Wirral and the immediate impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on these differences in health outcomes and recommended actions that we need to take to improve everybody's health. The impact of COVID will continue to evolve, so this is a snapshot of what we know now. Just a little reminder about the Public Health Annual Report. It is a vehicle that the Director of Public Health uses to identify key issues, flag up problems, report progress and inform local interagency action. You might be wondering, why is she coming here with a health report? Well, actually, it's because health is everybody's business, and hopefully you can see through the report that the work of this committee is important around improving health outcomes for local people. We've published 6 reports since we were moved back to the Council in 2013 on a various range of topics such as domestic violence, problem gambling, and these reports have led to action. So we've now got a reduction in the number of people smoking in the borough to levels below the national average, increased support for partners who were feeling socially isolated, and a significant amount of activity to reduce the damage caused to our communities from alcohol abuse and gambling. So this report seeks to direct action that we need to take to reduce the impact of health inequalities on our residents and improve health for everyone in the borough. If I can just quickly take you through the slides. So we can have the next slide, please. Thank you. We'll move on quickly from this one, but just to say that, gosh, well, it's not just been a year, it's been actually 2 years, hasn't it? Because Wirral, as you will all know, we're very much at the forefront of dealing with COVID-19 when we welcomed our guests to Arrow Park back in January 2020. And by golly, I can remember that day when I had to ring the chief exec to say, I can't believe this, but we're having the guests come from Wuhan. And actually, that partnership working that we did at Arrow Park during January and February really, I think, helped us as a borough and as a set of partners to forge relationships that have helped us to actually work together really well over the past almost 2 years now. Next slide, please. So what I think this pandemic has done has held up a mirror to the existing health, economic and social inequalities that we've got within our borough. But unfortunately, it's made these differences worse, and it's had the heaviest impact on those challenged communities that we have within Wirral. And really, this report is a call to action across all partners across the borough, not just the council, but to actually do something different. And we know we can, because we've proved that over the last 2 years. Next slide, please. I made the comment right at the beginning about the fact that health inequalities is actually not just around people's health status. It's not just about the NHS. It's about where we live, about where we work, our communities that we live in, how connected we feel. And that's why it's really important that, and I think this is why Public Health was moved across to the Council in 2013, was so that we can have that widest view on public health and health inequalities within the borough. So the work through the Regeneration Initiative, the work of this committee, all contribute to better health outcomes for local people. Next slide, please. You'll be very familiar with the maps that we show now of life expectancy within the borough. And unfortunately, we have our east-west split, don't we? Sometimes I feel maybe we've become a little bit blind to this because this data has been presented on so many occasions. But we do have a difference in life expectancy of 10 years for both our men and our women across the area, which I'm sure none of us actually want to see. And my other reflection on this report is, unfortunately, I could have written this report 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, because the health inequalities that we have are things that are very entrenched. What COVID has done is really just expanded and I think really shown a mirror on those health inequalities and made them worse for some people. Next slide, please. But it's not all doom and gloom. And I think we've taken action, as I mentioned. We've taken action around supporting people to stop smoking previously. This is a slide that shows you key health indicators throughout your life. The various colours relate to whether Wirral is worse than, same as or better than the England average. So we are better than the English average on quite a few things. And I was just reflecting that for this committee, air quality and green space, we have better indicators around that as a borough than other parts of the country. We're not so good on a range of things, which, as I've already mentioned, includes life expectancy at birth and issues such as fuel poverty. Next slide, please. So what do we want to do about it? I think, as I've said, this is our opportunity to really move at pace to reduce the gap in health between our communities and really make sure that we use what we've learnt through the pandemic to make a difference. Next slide, please. So there are 5 recommendations within the report. They are high level. They are about influencing the work of the council, committees, partners, and they, underneath this, will be delivery plans that we need to make sure are monitored and reviewed, obviously. We're also, through the Health and Wellbeing Board, about to start a set of a workshop programme with Sir Michael Marmot and his team from London, who have been commissioned through the Healthcare Partnership for Cheshire and Merseyside to help us think through what a local action plan should look like for Wirral, for the place of Wirral. So if I just very quickly look at each recommendation as we go through. So number one, our regeneration plans for this borough are phenomenal, but there is real need, I believe, to, alongside those physical regeneration, is the making sure that our communities feel that they're part of it and that they're very much seen that the aspiration around the physical regeneration is for them as well. So they see that those opportunities are very much for the people who live in Birkenhead, Tranmere, etc. And you'll see in here there's a number of actions that I'm recommending, and I am going to go and talk to the Regen Committee, I think it's next week. Next slide, please. Also, looking about our healthy standard of living for all, this is very much, a lot in here is about linking to our housing strategy and the work that the housing team are doing. And obviously, I've also made comments in here around support around fuel poverty as well. Next slide, please. Obviously, children, young people and families, absolutely key that we work very closely with them. So working closely with not only Simone White and the Children and Young People's Directorate, but also the many community groups that we have within the borough. So, for example, Koala North West, really about ensuring that we get in there early to support our children and young people and make sure they get the help and support that they need, and that those families also get the help and support that they need very early on. Next slide, please. It's a particular slide here about action that we're really asking the NHS to undertake. There's lots of work that the NHS can do, and I know they're under significant pressure at the moment, but issues such as improving screening rates for cancers, issues such as offering more preventative work, for example, around people who want to be more physically active, for example, or the work that they're doing around long COVID as well. And then the final recommendation is around just really building on the most amazing and fantastic work we've done through the humanitarian cell with our communities. I'm sure you all know and probably been part of the way that communities rallied over the past 2 years, and it's been inspiring, I think, to see the way that communities really worked with us to make sure that local vulnerable people were given the help and support, and the opportunities to carry that on, I think, are ones that we can't miss. So thank you very much. This is a call to arms. It is about saying we've learnt a lot, let's not lose it, and let's continue to really focus on these outcomes, whilst we've also got all the challenges. We've also got all the challenges around the finance. I don't think it's one or the other. I think we can do both. We need to work hard to make sure we do both, but I think we can. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Julie. And you have made reference to the phenomenal work that public health that you and the team have been doing during the COVID pandemic, and it does show that what can be achieved. Amazing work and life-saving work, and people coming together. And I think it is really important not just to flag up the problems that we face as a borough, which, as you say, are historic and are really quite profound, but that we can do something when we really put our minds to it. And I know that you and the team are working really hard. So I'm really glad that you brought this report. It makes for a really distressing reading at times, but it's really important reading, and there is hope in there as well. So thank you for that. Does anybody have any comments or questions for Julie about the report?
Thanks, Chair. Just a comment for Julie, really. And I just find the report absolutely excellent. It really is. I mean, obviously, it's historic stuff. We've seen this going on in the borough and the inequalities for many, many years. And I'm sure we'll see it in the years to come. But we're also seeing the work that you've done, that we've identified how we can improve and move forward on it. As you mentioned about us taking on the challenge of accepting the people from Wuhan, I thought that was absolutely fabulous. And what we did learn from that, I benefited. I nearly lost my life to COVID in Harrow Park. And because of, we got in at the early stages and we got that expertise, is probably why I and a lot of other people survived. So I just wanted to thank you for that work. And, you know, just go at it, girl. It's super.
Thank you, and I feel very humble because, you know, there's so many people that have been involved in this. So, yeah, I never thought I'd be a Director of Public Health in the middle of a pandemic, I can assure you of that. So I have been, sort of, I suppose, the face of it, and we won't talk about that. But anyway, it's just, I feel very humble because I couldn't have done this without everybody else that's been around me and supported me. So I thank you, and I will feed back your comments.
Brilliant, thank you. Steve, did you have something to say?
Yeah, I mean, thank you for all the hard work that's gone on. I think we have been an exemplar as a borough during COVID, and you know, I think all councils have suffered financially, but you know, what could you do in the face of a pandemic? You've just got to get on with it and do your level best. So I'm grateful. I know nationally prior to COVID, we were seeing the first time in our history that morbidity, people were dying younger. I know COVID has sort of knocked everything askew, but prior to that, people were beginning to die younger as a trend. And second question is, I'm got a real passion that in terms of both financial and health benefits, that we haven't really got a big impetus for extra care housing on the Wirral. I think older people, and I talk about my mum's experience, I always relate to life. My mum moved from a 3-bedroom council house to a sheltered bungalow in Eastham, be by my sister, and I think prolonged my mum's life exponentially. She didn't have to go into care at any point. Well, towards the end she did. But it extended her life, but also released a warm, friendly family house for a family to move into. And I just don't see the impetus on Wirral for extra care housing because obviously less people going into care or people staying in their own home longer we all talk about money, is an economic benefit as well. So it's economic health, and I don't get that whoosh about us driving extra care housing. So that's my question.
So you're right about the so life expectancy had increased over many years, and as you say, just before the pandemic, we were reporting that it wasn't continuing to increase at the same level. So and we are now looking at the moment around the what we call excess mortality, so excess deaths that we've seen over the past couple of years. But unfortunately, COVID has very much targeted our older people and our most vulnerable people, and that's what we saw in the first wave particularly, and January this year, and hence why the vaccination programme is so important, and hence why the vaccination programme was introduced in the way that it was. But it's obviously something we'll continue to look at and investigate. I think it's also really important about why the wider determinants of health and why the work that's done around employment, housing, keeping people active. That's what we need in this borough to make sure that life expectancy can increase and we can support people to have as healthy and as long life as possible. One of our real challenges in this borough is that, unfortunately, people tend to get poorly earlier, and then the later years of life are in not good health, and that's one of the real challenges we need to get. Sometimes there's a fatalism that this is how life's going to be, and it doesn't need to be, and I think that's a big challenge for ourselves. I can't really talk about extra care housing, but I know if Graham was here, I think Graham Hodgkinson would be saying we are pushing extra care housing, and it is very much an agenda that we want to take forward. I also think through the Regen programme, I've heard Alan Evans as well talk about the work in Wirral Waters and the dementia village down there. So hopefully those officers will start to bring those things forward. Thanks.
Thanks, Julie. I've just got a question from Helen, please.
Hi. what we've seen here in this committee is lots of people commit to litter picking, you know, one Wirral, one bulls and all things like that. And I'm really interested to see what the health and well-being benefits of that activity, because it's taken off threefold in the Wirral, and there's lots of people. It's intergenerational. I think it's something that maybe Public Health yourself could look into and see what the benefits are, and to encourage it further. You know, the council's working really hard. They provide all the equipment, and then groups of people are going out together and really have pride in their local neighbourhood, but they're also keeping themselves well. So I think that's something, particularly relating to this committee, that could be something we could be working on in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Helen. I totally support that, because I know that volunteering is associated with better mental health. So, yeah, that's a really good point. Does anybody else have any? Simon?
Chair, thank you. Thank you for the report, Julie. Really interesting. Second time I've heard it. A question I didn't think about the first time. Some huge successes, and we're very successful, and things are getting better. And obesity it strikes me as the next huge thing on that, because it causes us so many problems. What are we doing, and could you say a few words about what we might do, please?
So again, just prior to the pandemic, there was actually a cross-party working group looking at obesity that Councillor Clements led, and you've reminded me that we need to get that work out and relook at it, because they looked at a number of elements, not least around being active, so walking and cycling, also about working with our local schools, about the meal offer in schools. So there's a wide range of activity we can do around obesity. So we need to get that work out that we did before the pandemic, and make sure we're progressing it. It'd be great if we had some national support around this as well. You know, the sugar tax really helped. If we could have other things where we saw mandation around reduction of salt, sugar, fats within foods, probably a bit better food labelling as well. So it's a multifaceted approach that we need. So I think through my professional association, we lobby nationally, but locally there are some actions we can take, not least about encouraging people to be more active. And we do also commission Slimming World and Weight Watchers for people who need help to lose weight.
Thanks, Julie. You've mentioned a number of times about being active, and I know that this committee looks at road safety and active travel, and has done on a number of occasions. And I'm mindful of the ROSPA, the government-funded ROSPA report, which was entitled Road Safety and Public Health. And also the NICE review of Sir Michael Marmot's his review, which is it's entitled The Marmot Review: Implications for Spatial Planning, and they're basically that's just two examples. There's a whole host of other examples of pieces of work suggesting that public health should have a greater emphasis on promoting active travel and promoting road safety in particular to facilitate active travel. And obviously that's something that we're doing as part of the climate emergency, but we've not really thought about the public health aspect of it. And it's really interesting to hear you say that we're going to be working with Sir Michael Marmot on an action plan, which is really, really good news, really excellent news. I was wondering if we could ask or if I could urge that we include road safety and active travel as part of that, because obviously you've mentioned a number of times that all of us need to get more active, and this will alleviate the burden on the NHS considerably, and it will improve our lives. But it can't just be left to highways or region. We all have to do it together. So if public health can be part of that as well, that would be a really good part of the holistic approach to road safety and active travel. I was actually going to say that in terms of looking at the recommendations, we're simply invited in this committee to agree the recommendations that Julie's put forward, the quite considerable number of recommendations in that report. And I'd like to add our thanks to Julie and the team separately within this committee for such a thorough piece of work and such an important piece of work that should be, like the climate emergency, yes, very much so, like the climate emergency, it needs to be in our minds in everything we do, and I think your work is really thorough, and we're really grateful for it. So I'd like to add our thanks to Julie and the team for that. I'd also like to add, and I just need to pass this by the committee, obviously, if we can include, as was recommended by NICE and by ROSPA and a number of others, if we can look to include road safety as part of public health work in future.
I'd just like to second that, because I always believe prevention's better than cure if we can. Because I see so many road traffic incidents at the hospital. I think it would be very beneficial.
Yes, thanks. I was just going to say, I appreciate that, thank you. I was going to say, there are hospital trusts that I know of who, certainly one in London, who've actually helped fund and promote road safety measures because they've done a cost-benefit analysis and decided that not only does it improve people's lives and quality of life to prevent accidents, it's actually cheaper for the NHS and the local community in the long run to prevent these accidents, but not accidents, though collisions, obviously. And so they've actually looked to say that road safety is cheaper for them as well as improving people's lives and quality. So, Julie, would that be possible?
Well, we do work very closely already with the road safety team, and I do believe it's already within the community safety work. And I think the other way we will incorporate it in our work is we've done something called a health impact assessment of the local plan, which looks at where, from a public health perspective, these are the great things, carry on doing it. These are the things we think you need to do some mitigations, and obviously having a safe environment is part of that. So I do believe we can pick it up through the work we'll do with Regen around looking at their plans, but also the work that we do with the team around road safety as well. So I think we can pick it up through those, if that gives you enough assurance.
Just to make it more something that's explicit, maybe we can, because it's picked up by NICE themselves in their work on the original Marmot review. So they say that their piece of work in 2010 was the Marmot review, implications for spatial planning. And it's just the idea that we need to be explicit in our, for example, some JSNAs around the country actually have a strand of road safety. And I was just wondering if we could just have that, because I know the work, it's being done, we just need to make it more explicit.
Happy to work with officers to take that forward. Yeah.
Brill, thank you. Any more comments or questions? Because I think we can move to agree the recommendations. So the recommendations were that we endorse the recommendations detailed within the Public Health Annual Report. We've already agreed that we would add our really quite sincere thanks for this huge and very important piece of work. I'd also like to add on that I'd just like to see an explicit strand from now on road safety and active travel, because that's how we're going to get more active. Do I have any support in that? Claire, thank you. Thank you for that. Can we agree that? Agreed. Brilliant. Thanks very much. Have you got that? That's great. Thank you very much. Julie, thank you very much for that. Thank you. So this leads us to agenda item 9, which is the Environment Committee Budget Report, which can be found on pages 129 to 142. And I'd like to invite Sarah Cox to present this report. Thank you, Sarah.
So this report details the outcomes of the budget workshops held in August and September 2021. The purpose of this report is for the committee to consider feedback and outcomes from the budget workshops which have been held in recent months. There's one recommendation for this report. It is recommended that the committee agrees the budget workshop feedback and outcomes as detailed in Appendix 1. The Council has a legal responsibility to set an annual balanced budget which establishes how financial resources are to be allocated and utilised. To successfully do so, engagement with members, staff and residents is undertaken. The recommendations in this report are an initial step in this approach. These budget workshops were convened to enable officer and member liaison on proposed budget options in order to facilitate discussion and allow direction to be obtained on further analysis required. The budget workshops also provided an opportunity for alternative proposals to be considered. The workshops for this committee were held on the 9th of August and the 8th of September. There's also a workshop relating to Tourism Committee held on the 14th of September, which is referenced in this report as one of the savings related to an overall Neighbourhoods Directorate saving, so potentially impacts both committees. As outlined in the report, savings were discussed relating to an existing amount of £150,000, which was included in the medium-term financial plan. In addition, new savings proposals were considered and costed. These could generate another £231,000 to £411,000, depending on what options are accepted. None of the proposals discussed at the workshops were rejected at the workshop and could potentially be considered further. The report also includes a summary of questions raised by members at the workshops and also details budget setting milestones which were involved in the budget setting process as part of the 22-23 budget process. And that concludes the summary of the budget workshops report. So are there any questions associated with this report?
Thanks, Sarah. Does anybody have any comments or questions about the report? Steve?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, that's a true reflection of where we are. I think, having come from the other meeting earlier, I think none of the savings that we looked at in the budget workshop, I think it wasn't, I think it was Alan's phrase, none of them scared the horses, I think you referred to, Alan. I was like using other people's words. So my view is that, given where we are, that if there was no, and it didn't seem to be any vehement objection to the package that we have so far, we could potentially use that as a baseline for the next steps. So I don't know, is there an agreement that we put them in the bank and then move on? Because I guess, given where we are, they're going to be coming back for more, potentially. I don't know, but I'm just saying that's where we are. The other point is that I noticed that in December we get the annual government financial settlement, and we haven't heard that yet. So we are, in a way, working in a vacuum. You know, I don't know whether local government's going to be prioritised or demonised or whatever. But I'm guessing from the talk we had next door that they're not expecting the cavalry to come over the hill with lots more money. So my view is that, you know, those savings that have been through the workshop, unless there was something that I missed that was causing complete aggravation, are sort of should be taken as granted. But I'll prepare to be guided by you, Chair, because you now go on, don't you, with those savings packages, P&R. As we heard next door, P&R will take a primary role in driving the savings package. That's what they're being told to do. So I guess they're going to do that. So they're just my comments, Chair, if that's useful.
Thanks, Steve. That's very helpful. Does anybody else have any? Simon?
Yeah, Chair, thank you. Unfortunately, the workshops were held when I couldn't attend, so I beg your pardon for that. I apologise. And because of what Steve sort of outlined there, that this is almost out of our hands, and these will go forwards, I'm sure. What I don't want to do is recommend things that just don't seem fair. The increase in bin charges for repairs, you know, my bin was damaged by someone, it wasn't my fault, and so if you don't, well, you're not going to have to mind. We're going to abstain on the understanding that these will go forwards and be discussed elsewhere.
Sorry, I didn't put my mind. I have to say that we may as well have not had the meeting next door if that's where we're at. When it, you know, you can't have it. You can't. I'm not prepared to. I think the recommendation is to note this report. Is it?
It is. I mean, I have a few issues with some of the details in the report as well. Apart from the fact that on page 137 the dates do imply that we had 3 workshops on those dates, and that will need clarifying because we didn't. We had 2 workshops on one of those dates and another date. We asked for more details, and you know, we still haven't got the details. which, as Steve points out, is not really possible at the moment as well. So we are working in this situation where it's just not possible to have details. We don't know the constraints that we're working in financially. It's a really, really tricky situation. So I can understand the temptation to abstain, to be honest, because there is just not enough information to work with. But it is what it is, and we've got to take responsibility. So I don't think we can, I don't think we should abstain, but I can see why you might be tempted to do that. I'm hoping that it's not just for political shenanigans. I'm hoping that it's for genuine reasons. Assuming it is, I can see the temptation, because we are working with so little information and it's such important decisions. And I know for a fact that I and Councillor Cook and possibly others raised really quite significant heartfelt concerns about a number of these proposals. You know, the digital highways, just the advertising boards. There's a number of reasons why I'm really, really not happy about that. But we know, like you said, many of these things are going to come through anyway, because we're so stuck in terms of options and finances. But I think the errors on the dates need to be clarified. We need to be very, very careful that we're recording accurate information about when we met and how many workshops we actually had. And I do think that it needs to be made clear that we would like more information about each of the options before we can make any more decisions about them. Steve?
No, I've looked at the recommendation. I'm happy with saying agrees the budget workshop feedback and outcomes as detailed in Appendix 1 and being reported to P&R for consideration. It's factual. We did have those discussions. The feedback and the outcomes are what you've said. We're still requiring more information on other stuff. If we can all vote for the recommendation, as Simon alluded to, it'll be decided at a higher level of what's acceptable or not. But we've made our comments, we've made our inquiries. It didn't sound the right sort of language from Simon. I think they're looking for someone else to blame again for the budget issues. So we'll see what P&R comes up with. If next door hasn't banged heads together, then I don't know what will.
Thanks, Steve. Does anybody else have any comments to make? Bruce?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's probably a little bit controversial what I'm about to say, but going back to last year, to the budget that we introduced last year, one of the budget items was the cessation of grass cutting and some of the litter removal from certain areas. It was very, very controversial, and myself and the elected members worked very, very hard with some of the council officers to actually deliver that service within budget. And there were concessions made, and we did look for alternatives, and we worked very well together. But at the end of the cutting season, which is not long past, I spoke to council officers who were really, really concerned about this situation going forward. And whilst they delivered what they needed to, it was just outside of budget. And council officers are saying to me, it's unsustainable unless we look at it again and tweak it in some way so that we can deliver. I think we did an excellent job last year on what we did deliver, because there was lots and lots of issues. We had people complaining about rats and vermin and dog ticks and all kinds of issues. But what concerned me more than anything else was that some of the cessation sites that were selected were right within the midst of residential properties, and people were actually looking out of their front window onto grass that was, 2-3 foot high, and all the issues that went with it. And through negotiation, we did achieve a good outcome, in so much as some of the areas that were cessation sites and shouldn't have been cut, the officers actually agreed to cut them because they could see the benefit for the residents. And there was no issue at all with the cessation sites that were by the side of bypasses places like this away from residential properties. And as I say, we worked very hard to achieve it, and it was achieved, but it was outside the budget. And I would like to, but we were told last year, when we accepted this as a budget cut, that it would be revisited. And what I would ask for is, can we revisit it, have another look, and just see if we can achieve a better outcome?
Thanks,
Thank you.
Bruce. Yes, I agree with you. We made it really clear right from the start that that would only work if it was done with very close consultation with elected members who would be representing those local communities that they knew so well. And I felt very strongly that that needed to be done from the start, and it wasn't. And that did cause a lot of problems. And those councillors who took it upon themselves, as you did, to then work closely with the officers to sort of rectify that situation, did do a lot of work, but managed to get some good results out of that. So I appreciate the work that you've put in and that the officers then later put into that additional work. If we'd consulted with elected members on choosing those sites and how those sites were going to be dealt with from the start, I think it might have been easier. And I think that's the plan going forward, because it's on the work programme. If you actually look later on at the work programme, we have got a piece of work that we are hoping to do where we talk about maintenance. So we can hopefully we can include that in the discussions, because I totally agree with you. I don't know if anybody else has got anything to say about that. Alan?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I rather agree with what Bruce has just said. I must say I found the officers have been extremely helpful in my own particular ward in addressing some of the concerns that residents had. And I think it's fair to say my emails also had a lot of messages from people saying, yeah, we like the rewilding, we'd like to see the longer grass, and it is very much a question of deciding where it's appropriate. So those other areas, as Bruce said, where it is not. And I have found that in most cases we've been able to negotiate a suitable compromise. One thing that does concern me, though, and it probably applies to most of us in our wards, where we've got some grassed areas that have been allowed to grow wild, which immediately back on to the rear fences of residents' properties. And I'm getting complaints from a small number of residents about weeds, brambles, damaging their fence and coming into their property. And I feel as owners of the public land, we do have a duty to those residents to make sure that we're not damaging their property by not maintaining a corridor around those the backs of those fences. I think that's only fair. But I was going to comment on the point that Steve was making earlier about the workshops. As I understood it, what we agreed was that we'd ask the officers to go away and work up those proposals, and I don't think we've had the feedback on that yet. I think the vast majority of them will be ones that will be happily accepted, but I can understand that the reservations on one or two of them, and until we see exactly how much each one would save, whether it's going to be worth the saving or not, I think we need to perhaps just wait and see. But it would be very interesting to get that feedback on how much we're going to raise from each of those proposed savings, and no doubt the majority of them will be built into next year's budget.
Thanks, Alan. Before going to Nikki, can I just bring Chris in, because it might be relevant? Thanks.
Yes, really, it is going back to the budget issues, the workshops, and the last point that Alan made. It's just I'm concerned about how this paragraph on page 137 that the Chair referred to is going to read when it's amended, because the first two references to the workshops that we held, the Environment Committee, on the 10th of August, and it was actually the 9th of September, you corrected that when you read it out, Saria, they accurately discuss the way we looked at feedback with no reference to us making any decisions, agreeing anything. And then the next sentence, budget option recommendations were agreed during the workshop on the 14th of September. It makes it pretty clear to anybody reading that the assumption is that we have a third one, and then this committee agreed on those. Whereas, in fact, it was a different committee. And we're waiting to, as Alan said, have the final, perhaps third workshop where we would actually agree them. I just really want that paragraph corrected to reflect that. I'm not saying, let's hold back agreeing this report as it stands, because I know we'll have an opportunity in the future to, tweak it in various ways. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Before bringing Nikki in to respond to the points that have been made about her remit, I totally agree with Chris on that. I do think it's important that we clarify in the minutes of this meeting and in any paperwork associated that we did have two meetings. We requested more information before making final decisions, and we definitely didn't endorse anything. Well, we didn't reject anything because we weren't in a situation to endorse or reject. We didn't endorse anything or agree anything, and this, on first reading, does give the impression that we agreed to these proposals, whilst understanding that we probably will have to because we've got no alternative. I think it's important to put on record that when we first saw them, we certainly didn't endorse them, and I think that's just important for all of us. Nikki, do you want to come in now? Sorry.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Obviously, Sarah is here tonight, and we can take that back to the Director of Resources, whose report this is around the finances, to make sure that that point is clarified. And Sarah was in attendance at those workshops as well, so I'm sure she can support the points being made there. My points were to Councillor Brahim around those issues you've highlighted in your particular ward. If you email myself and Mike Coburn, we'll pick that up outside, obviously, this committee. Happy to support. And also the general point that it was, and thank you, Councillor Berry, this was our year one. It was quite an innovative, project, if you like, and it was a pilot, and we learned a lot through that pilot, both from an officer, from a community, from a resident, and from a local ward member perspective, and we really appreciated all that feedback. And I think what you'll see through the work on the forward plan is the pollinator strategy and plan coming forward, which you'll see has links into the work that we've started with our communities around the rewilding, and also that broader climate agenda as well. So it's getting that balance right. We understand that, and we are continuing to listen to our residents and through you as local ward members. So keen to continue the conversation and the strategy. Thank you.
Thanks, Nikki. And it is important to note that we did get a lot of positive feedback about the some of the rewilding that was going on. That there was a great deal of positive feedback, and I think it would be missed by a number of residents, a significant number. And it was also very popular in the budget consultation as well, wasn't it? So thank you for that, Nikki. Any other comments about this report? No? So I propose that we agree the recommendations. Any seconder for that? Thank you. Can we agree that by assent? Great. Is that a no? Okay. Oh, you are abstaining. You are abstaining. Okay. So, well, if we have...
Sorry, I just want to be absolutely clear. We haven't got a problem with this document going forward, other people seeing it going forward. Just that we weren't present at the discussions, and there are some issues with the report. That's the only reason. I'm quite clear that we're not dodging any responsibility, Steve. We will step up, as you'd failed to do when you were leader for 10 years.
Sorry, that's ridiculous addition. That's not really appropriate. Not really appropriate. So even with the clarifications and making sure that we've got the dates right for the meetings.
Things in there that I don't think we would like to support, and had I been at the discussions, who knows what might have changed. But things like charging for the repairs of bins, I'm not 100% sure that we'd like to do that.
I think I've made it clear that I didn't support some of them as well. I'm not happy about the digital advertising, and there's probably other people who are not happy as well. But we asked, yeah, that's
what's happening. So you don't want to move them upstairs in consideration, and that's what an abstention is.
No, an abstention is allowing them to go upstairs. We're not voting against this.
Okay, a vote for this is not to endorse those particular proposals. A vote for this is to simply say we're sending it to P&R to discuss. Bruce.
Thank you, Chair. Is it possible that we could note it and then we can move on? Because I'm happy to note it. Because we haven't had any finalisation on anything yet. We're still in negotiations. We're still looking at things. So I'll be happy to note it.
Can I just confirm with Vicky that?
I think, Chair, the Policy and Resources Committee is asking for feedback. I suppose you could just simply note that that this is feedback which will be reported to Policy and Resources. Maybe we're being a little bit pedantic in terms of words. I mean, at the moment you're agreeing that this is fed back to Policy and Resources. You could just note the outcome of the workshop and note that it will be considered by Policy and Resources.
I'm happy with that. Does anybody have any objections to that? Okay, so okay. We agree that. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. So, thanks, Sarah, for that report. This brings us to agenda item 10, which is the committee's Q2 monitoring, and that can be found on pages 143 to 158. Sarah, thank you.
Thanks. This finance report for the Environment, Climate Emergency and Transport Committee shows the financial monitoring information for Q2 21-22. There are 4 recommendations for this report. 1, to note the year-end forecast revenue position of 552,000 adverse variance. Note the progress on achievement of approved savings for 21-22. Note the reserves allocated and note the year-end forecast position for capital of just over 2.036 million favourable variance. Start to summarise the revenue report. The revenue forecast position is projected to be 552,000 adverse, which has improved from an adverse position of 850,000 as at Q1. This is due to an adverse variance within highways infrastructure of 875,000, which is partly mitigated by a favourable variance within parks, environment and climate emergency. Part of this variance relates to car parking, as the saving was not implemented until September. And part of the unachieved saving has been mitigated this year, as footfall was better than originally projected at 75% of pre-COVID levels. The remainder of the unachieved saving is being mitigated this financial year due to a favourable variance within parks and environment, which is due to waste contract inflation being applied at less than what was anticipated. There are additional adverse variances relating to highways management of 442,000, and this is due for increases in demand for maintenance work and remedial work. Just move on to the savings progress. So for savings for 21-22, most savings relating to this committee are on track to be fully achieved. As mentioned in the revenue section, the only exception relates to car parking, which is reported as amber, with 953,000 of the £1 million forecast to be achieved this financial year. Only 300,000 of the saving is due to be achieved, with the remainder consisting of the mitigations as discussed above. It is expected by next financial year that this saving will be achieved in full. Moving on to the reserve section, a total of 443,000 of reserves are projected to be used as at Q2, but this will be reviewed throughout the financial year to check if there's any other reserves that need to be drawn down as well. Moving on to the capital section, Table 5 shows a summarised version of the capital schemes. There's more details in Appendix A, which break down the schemes by name in more detail. Some schemes relating to parks have been moved from the Tourism Committee to the Environment Committee since Q1, which is why some of the figures are slightly different to what was reported in Q1. A favourable variance of 2.036 million is projected overall. This is due to several schemes relating to flood prevention and parks expenditure, which has slipped into future years due to delays in commencement. Capital and revenue monitoring will continue to be monitored throughout the year, and any changes will be reported as part of the Q3 monitoring. This concludes the report for Q2 Climate Emergency and Transport Committee. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to take them. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Does anybody have any comments or questions about this? Alan?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Sarah, for the report. I'd just like to go on to the vexed issue of car parking charges. In 315, you say introduction of charges at new sites will be delayed as it will take time to purchase and install the ticket machines. Well, I think the decision has been made that we will be imposing these new charges. I think the details of the areas are still to be agreed. So have we actually purchased these ticket machines so they're ready to go as soon as a decision has been made on where these traffic regulation orders will be made? And when will we actually be asked to discuss those traffic orders? Because the sooner it happens, the sooner we can start generating the income.
Chair, I might be best placed to answer that rather than Sarah, if that's okay. So, no, we haven't purchased the machines, and we are about to start the TRO consultation for the other areas. As the report says, half the income is potentially generated from the standardisation of charges that were brought in shortly after the Decision Review Committee, and the remainder is from charging in other areas. So we will very shortly be starting that process of advertising the TROs and consulting on those. And, of course, the Decision Review Committee's resolution was that we bring back all the comments that are a result of that TRO consultation to this committee at a later date before any decisions are made on those other areas. Because of the consultation period starting later this month and us wanting to have evidence from the wider parking strategy review that's going on within Regen to refer to answer the no doubt objections that we will receive, we want to delay coming back to this committee until March, because by then we will have had chance to, even though that report may not have been through the process of being approved at a committee, we will have access to at least the findings of that report in its draft form as officers, and we'll be able to evidence those findings in our comments back to the objections that we are likely to receive as a result of the TRO consultation. At that point in time, once a decision is made by this committee, we will proceed to procure the equipment and install the meters. I think it's fair to say that we want to minimise the number of installations and do smarter charging, so it's a small number of meters that are digitally enabled and encourage people to use mobile phone technology to pay for parking. So it might not be that there's a vast number of parking meters and vast capital cost outlay in installing those meters to impose this or introduce this charging in new areas. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Simon. Does anybody else have any questions or comments? Bruce.
Thank you, Chair. Probably a question for Simon again, I would imagine. It's relating to page 157, roads and bridges. And I'm looking at the item to do with bridges, Lingham Lane Bridge. And there's a budgetary figure in there, £350,000. And it looks to me as if that figure has been spent. I'd like to know, has it been spent? And if it has been spent, is that figure purely for a review of what's going to happen? Because I am aware that the bridge is at the end of its lifespan, and I was given a figure of approximately £1 million to replace it. Now, we don't know where we're up to with this, but I went and looked at the bridge myself on Sunday, and there's certainly been no work done. So I'm wondering if this is just consultation fees for the £350,000. Could you enlighten me, please, Simon?
So, yes, through you, Chair, Councillor Berry. Lingham Lane footbridge, as you say, it's a steel footbridge over a railway line. It's the council's responsibility to maintain it. we put a budget figure in. I think it was slightly more than 350,000 at the time, a couple of years ago now, which was a figure we thought was sufficient to replace that footbridge. And that's been in the capital programme for a number of years, as I say. Quite a significant amount of that has been spent on feasibility studies, site investigation work and negotiations with Network Rail through officers and capitalisation of officers' time. But we've got to the point now where, as you quite rightly say, it's been determined that to replace the bridge in a manner which is acceptable to Network Rail could cost as much as £1 million. And when we've looked at the what's best value for that bridge, we've determined that it's better value for the council to carry on maintaining it rather than to replace it. It would also obviously require a significant consultation exercise if we were going to remove it, which was one of the other options as well. So it didn't just have to be a replacement scheme. It could have been a removal scheme and do away with the bridge as a crossing. It's not very well used. So that was an option as well. But we've decided, having looked at all the other options, that maintaining the bridge in its present condition is the best value for the council. So that the balance of the 350,000 will be used for other bridge maintenance activities within the capital programme.
Could I just come back, please, Chair? So how much is the balance that's remaining at the moment then? Do you have that figure? And also, is it not the responsibility or part responsibility of British Rail, the fact that it is over the railway line?
So I think the balance might be the full. We'd have to check, Sarah. Sorry, I'd have to check that. But I think the balance might be the full 350. It might have been originally more than that, something like close to 500,000 in the programme from a couple of years ago. But in answer to the second part of your question, no, Network Rail have no liability or responsibility for the structural maintenance whatsoever. It rests with the council. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Simon. Any other questions or comments? Steve?
Yeah, procedural comment, Chair. Given, obviously, the fact that we have, and you can't walk away from the fact that we've been heavily criticised in both the CIPRA report and the Ada Byrne report about the way we handled the car parking charges, having got, for the first time in my experience, full agreement at full council for the budget, all parties agreed for that. I'm sure there would have been a way forward at our first committee if one or another party had moved a resolution to allow us to crack on with the bulk of the work whilst these other consultations were taking place. However, that didn't happen, so we received criticism for it, and quite rightly. The other procedural matter is, I said, sort of given the sort of situation we are being told we're in at the moment, is it not fair to say that budgetary monitoring issues and the like should be further up the agenda and not sort of left to the graveyard shift, as we refer it as councillors, that when you're getting tired, and some of us have been here since 4 o'clock, that, you know, we actually send a message out to the people who are looking at us that budget issues should come further up the agenda, would be a recommendation in the future.
That's a really good point, Steve. Yes. Does Chris?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I agree entirely with Councillor Folks about that, but bringing it up higher up the agenda, the budgetary matters. I was just looking at the overall budget figures, the global figures, with £66.5 million and a deficit of 551 or 2,000, which is actually less than 1%, isn't it? And obviously that would have been considerably reduced by a few hundred thousand had we got the parking charges in earlier. And of course next year I'm assuming that it does say it's expected that we'll get the full benefit of all of the new charges implemented, by the next financial year. Because if it gets to council in March, if it's ready in March, then presumably we've got 2 months to get it ready for the next municipal year. So that's the expectation, and hopefully more expectations and hope. So I'm assuming that deficit, if all things being equal, would be reduced quite a lot further, using very primitive maths there. But I would just be interested to know, comparing this year with, say, 2 years ago before COVID, are we in a more favourable position in terms of that deficit of just over £500,000? Could anybody remember off the cuff? What was it roughly? Or was there no deficit 2 years ago?
You have to go back and check, but I think just off the top of my head, I think it was we were in a worse deficit position.
We were in a worse deficit before,
I think there was some savings that weren't being achieved, but we can go back and check the exact figures.
Yeah, oh, that's good to
hear.
It
was more than 552 because we're comparing 1920 financial year, aren't we, rather than because 2021 wasn't really a typical year to look into.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much, Sally.
Simon.
Briefly, we've spoken about the car parking charges and how the reports have said we should make the entire savings next year. Of course, West Kirby Seafront's going to be under a lot of concrete. I guess we won't incorporate that scheme for a little while, perhaps till the back end of the year is one thing, and therefore perhaps we won't make the full savings. I don't know. But I'd like to congratulate the Director because the report said that we haven't made all our savings, and often we don't, but it appears we do. Thank you.
Thanks, Simon. I have a question, Sarah. It's on page 158 of the agenda report about travel and transport. There's the capital funding, I think it is, for active travel tranche 1, tranche 2, the combined authority transport plan, and a number of other transport funding streams. Can I just confirm that this is part of this committee's budget? Thank you.
Yeah, we have actually included it within part of this committee's budget for the. Is this for the capital schemes? Is it? Or for the, yeah, we have actually included it within this committee, but I think we're still looking to make sure everything's allocated to the right committee. So it might be that we need to move it. But if we think there's anything that shouldn't be there, then we can look into it and move it if we need to across to another committee.
No, it was quite the opposite. I'm delighted to see it there because it was always active travel funding and strategy was always part of this committee to start off with. It was part of my remit as portfolio holder and was put into this committee, and we have actually voted to keep it in this committee, and that was passed unanimously. So I'm very pleased to see it there, and hope that it stays there. Thank you, Sarah. Any other questions or comments about that? No. Can we therefore? I propose that we agree the recommendations in this report. Great. Everyone agreed? Yeah. That's great. Thank you. This brings us to item 11, which is the work programme update, and that can be found on page 159 to 168. It's fairly self-explanatory. Some items have had to be deferred from this meeting due to a by-election, and I note reference to the active travel working group, which was proposed to meet in December and is not now able to meet in December. We've got a lot of extra meetings in November and December. I have asked senior officers if there will be any decisions about active travel that will be made before the working group is able to meet, now scheduled to be sometime in January, but we don't have a fixed date. I've asked senior officers if there will be any decisions made between now and the active travel working group actually meeting. And I look forward to getting an answer to that question because it's a very important question. There is an agreement between the two committees about how active travel will be dealt with and how decisions will be made. And the working group, the active travel working group, was to be part of that and was then to allocate decision-making either to this committee or to Economy, Regen and Development Committee. If we're not able to have an active travel working group actually meet, I would like both committees to be fully briefed and fully informed and fully part of any decision-making in accordance with the agreement between the two committees. So that's just my comment on the work programme in the absence of a working group on active travel meeting as scheduled originally in December. Does anybody else have anything to add to the work programme?
Just to commend you, Chair, on your foresight under the issue of road safety, your intervention at full council. I can report back from the Liverpool City region that they have adopted the Vision Zero strategy for road safety. And hopefully all the constituent authorities within the Liverpool City region will all be singing from the same hymn sheet. So thanks for your intervention on that.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, that was very gratifying to see. So hopefully everybody moving in the right direction and in the same direction. So that is, hopefully lives will be saved because of that. So that's very gratifying. Thanks, Steve. Any other comments or questions? No? So I've got, in light of the active travel working group not meeting in December as originally scheduled, I think November originally and then December, and not able to meet perhaps until January, no fixed date being made for the active travel working group. I had an amended version of this recommendation. It's nothing too drastic, but I'll just read it out. And that is that this committee note the work programme and the fact that the active travel working group is not meeting in December as planned. We expect that any decisions about active travel that may need to be made before the working group can meet will be made jointly with this committee and Economy, Region and Development Committee in line with the arrangements made between the two chairs agreed at PNR on the 30th of June 2021. Thank you. Can we agree that by assent? Great. Thank you very much. And that, if that's noted, that's okay. That brings us to the end of this meeting. So can I thank everybody for their time and for